I came home on Christmas Eve and realized I had been replaced. The December wind swept across the cold Seattle sky as I set foot on the familiar steps after 8 months of traveling in a foreign land. In my hand is a suitcase. On my body is a suit that still smells of victory from a trial in Frankfurt, where I saved an entire corporation from collapse. I imagined I would be welcomed as a hero. But when the door opened, what awaited me was not a hug from my wife or a smile from my 2 children, but a strange look and a man sitting cross-legged on the chair I once called Daddy's chair. I returned, just as everything fell apart. And that night I began my plan to take it all back, not with anger, but with truth. Hold on tight, because this story has just begun. Snow crunched under his heels as Daniel Harlow stepped out of his silver-gray Uber. He took a deep breath. The December air in Rochester, Minnesota was cold, but also full of nostalgia. It's been almost 9 months and he hasn't come home yet. Daniel was still wearing the same dark gray suit he wore at the last hearing at the International Trade Court in Frankfurt. It was a lawsuit that lasted nearly a year, causing him to live almost all the time in Germany. But in return, it was also the most resounding victory in his legal career. A $2.4 billion settlement that he destroyed with millimeter-correct tactics. Harlow was the person who saved Weldon Technologies from bankruptcy. And now, after everything, he returns with a simple wish: a Christmas Eve with his wife and 2 children. The classic 2-story house, located at the end of a quiet street, appeared with Christmas lights flickering on the porch. It's still the exact string of lights he put up himself last year. But now, each light evokes a question. Will everything still be the same as before? Each step up the steps becomes heavier with memory. During the 9 months away from home, the FaceTime calls between him and his wife, Kendra, became increasingly shorter. Messages become less frequent. And the children, Caleb and Naomi, now seem to be getting used to the space where the sofa he used to sit every night. Daniel imagined the moment of returning hundreds of times during the 14-hour flight. He imagined Kendra embracing him outside the door. Caleb, 17, and Naomi, 15, would rush out like no day was missed. But real life is not like imagination. When Daniel opened the door, the first sound he heard was not a shout of joy. It was laughter, then silence. "Look who still remembers the way home," Kendra's voice rang out. But unlike every time, this time there was something cold, almost ironic, in her voice. Daniel stood still in the doorframe, his own house, and felt like a stranger. Kendra was still sitting on the sofa. Next to her was a man, tall, salt and pepper hair, wearing a Rolex watch and casually resting his hand on the armrest. Strange face, but also too familiar in how I sit as if this were my home. "You're early," Kendra said, glancing at her watch. "We thought you would come back tomorrow." "I changed flights early," Daniel replied, placing his suitcase on the floor. Caleb didn't look up from his phone, just let out one sentence. "Dad, why are you coming back?" "No one wants you." Each word was like a punch to the chest, but Daniel kept his expression the same, just like when he was suddenly exposed by the lawyer on the other side with new evidence in court. Naomi walked out of the kitchen, didn't bother to say hello, just dropped one sentence. "Mom's new boyfriend is moving in tomorrow." Daniel turned to look at the other man. At least he had enough conscience to look embarrassed. "Kendra, who is this?" Daniel asked, even though he knew the answer. "This is Grant," Kendra said, "and this is my temporary ex-husband. Not for long." The word temporary rang out like a hammer, But Daniel did not react. Just hold out your hand calmly. I understand. Daniel Harlow. Gladly, Grant said, shaking his hand. That Christmas dinner with Daniel was a drama. On the outside, it's still a dining table, lit candles, a turkey dish, but inside is a cold, numbing distance. There's no gift under the tree with your name on it. Not a word of thanks, not a hug. Just an unnecessary presence. In the very house he once called home. And as Daniel lay down on the extra bed in the living room, the room that used to be his office, he knew what awaited him here was not a reunion. It's a battle. On Christmas Eve, Daniel tossed and turned in the dark. Laughter echoed from the living room like needles piercing the eardrum. He knew Caleb's voice well, Naomi's slightly sharp laugh, and also the deep voice of that man, Grant, the stranger who had just sat in his chair while using the set of dishes he had bought for his 10th wedding anniversary. Each laugh made Daniel's heart quiet. He opened his phone and clicked on the house's security monitoring app. An old habit, like how he used to watch cameras to check whether the children were studying seriously or not. But this time, he didn't watch to check on the kids. It's to test people's hearts. Data from the past 8 months remains intact. Daniel started yesterday, then gradually retreat. He saw Grant enter the house, the first time, the second time, the 13th time, the 30th time. Now, that man has gone in and out of Daniel's house 137 times. Daniel couldn't take his eyes off the screen when he saw the recording of Kendra sitting at the kitchen table, where the two of them had shared morning coffee for many years, talking on speakerphone with the lawyer. That was 3 months ago. The plan is, if he comes back soon, I will force a quick divorce. The colder I am with him, the better off I will be, she said. Plan. Every sentence and every word seemed to emphasize the truth. He had not only been betrayed in love, it's a planned, methodical, step-by-step betrayal. Then came the part where Kendra stood next to Naomi and Caleb. Remember what I told you. When Dad comes home, act distant. Don't hug, don't say you miss, just make him feel unwelcome. I need him to back off, as quickly as possible. Daniel put down the phone. Don't scream, don't destroy, just silence. Quiet like the way he learned during 20 years of practicing law. When the opponent is forced into a corner, the winner is not the one who raises his voice but maintains his reason. The next morning, the house was filled with laughter. Sweet cakes, the smell of cinnamon, the smell of steaming hot chocolate. Daniel walked into the kitchen, but no one turned around. "Merry Christmas," Kendra let out a sentence. "Really?" Daniel asked, his eyes never leaving her gaze. "There are no gifts for me under the tree." "You disappeared," she replied simply. "What did you expect?" "Honestly," Daniel said. No need to argue, no proof needed, because the truth sometimes is more straightforward to tell than to prove. Kendra took a deep breath. She stood up, poured coffee, avoiding Daniel's gaze. "We've changed. I've filed. The lawyer will contact you after the holidays." Daniel nodded. "Not surprising. I just feel lighter, because finally, she told the truth. First time." In the afternoon, Daniel quietly packed his things. Meanwhile, Kendra throws a Christmas party as if nothing happened. Grant returned, carrying gifts for everyone, including Caleb and Naomi. They giggled as Grant told the story. "Sit right on Daniel's armchair. Wear a new pair of fur slippers, the same color as the floor carpet." It was as if he had replaced Daniel's position, ideally. Daniel stood at the door, looking at the room one last time before leaving. When he told Kendra he would get back to you later, She smiled, visibly relieved. She thought he would retreat. She thought he lost. But what she didn't know was that he had already started the game and had already made the first move. Daniel left that house, the place that used to be his home, without bringing more than 2 suitcases of clothes and a file. He took a taxi to the Parker Regent Hotel and booked a temporary room for a few weeks. The room on the 14th floor looks directly at the Lawyer Building, where Daniel has worked for nearly 2 decades. While the January winds swept through the city as if trying to sweep away everything, Daniel sat in the warm yellow light of the desk lamp, his laptop open, his eyes following the detailed list he had silently compiled since before Christmas. The essence of a lawyer, especially a good lawyer, is not in reacting impulsively. It lies in perseverance, astuteness, and the ability to see the whole picture like a chess player. Daniel knows clearly, if he reacts with emotion, he loses. But if you wait long enough, string together enough data, choose the right moment, then you can not only regain your honor, but also turn the whole game. The next morning, he called an old acquaintance, Monica Larson, a private investigator who was Daniel's client. Her former company mistreated her, and Daniel helped her sue back and win. She answered the phone after 3 rings. "Daniel? Monday, I need a date, and this time I'm the guest." Daniel placed a file in front of Monica in a small coffee shop in Brooklyn Heights. She flipped through a few pages, her gaze sharper with each line. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice low. "Everything," Daniel replied. "Not just adultery. I need to know who Grant is, what he has done, who is behind it. I need to understand why the 2 kids changed so quickly. And I need to know Kendra's ultimate goal." Monica leaned back in her chair, thoughtful. "You have already done my part." "I just need someone with the key to go deeper," Daniel said. "I don't fight with words, I need the truth." She nodded. "Give me 2 weeks." 12 days later, Monica texted, "I have what you need." This time, they met at her office in an old building, with no sign, just a small metal sign with the name M. Larson Consulting. On the table are 3 files. Grant, or his real name is Grant Wallace, is a real estate businessman divorced 3 times and sued twice for contract fraud. The elegant man who once sat in Daniel's chair could grasp the psychological weakness of separated women, turning it into a financial advantage. But not only that. Monica opened her laptop and showed a recording of a conversation between Kendra and Grant, taken from the camera attached to Grant's smartwatch, a gift Monica had borrowed from an old partner of his. "Just let him sign, then it's all ours," Kendra's voice said. "I've convinced a few people on the bar committee. They're thinking about reinvestigating the Riker case. If his reputation shakes, it's all over for me," Grant said. Kendra laughed lightly. "Once he loses his position at the company, he will no longer be anything. The children will also stay with me. Do you think I don't know how to control them?" Daniel closed his eyes. Emotions roll up like a storm. But then it went quiet again. Because this time he wasn't shocked. I guessed it. And now he has proof. A week later, Daniel received a subpoena from Kendra's lawyer, demanding a 60% division of assets, plus alimony calculated based on his expected income after being promoted to partner. Sophia, Daniel's lawyer, put the manuscript on the table. "She's asking for too much," Sophia said. "But if we object, they will play tricks." "I hope they do," Daniel said quietly. "Are you sure?" Russo is not a novice. Daniel just smiled. February in New York is not pleasant. It was bitterly cold, and the wind felt like it had claws. But Daniel felt nothing. He got used to the cold. get used to the feeling of walking alone in the dark, only hearing the sound of shoes tapping on the empty sidewalk. And now, just like every time he's gone alone, he's entering a place where others don't think he dares. The law firm where he worked for 20 years, Fletcher & Ward, LLP, just postponed his decision to promote partner. No official announcement, no refusal, just a message through the assistant. Let's leave it alone for now. Many discussions are going in and out. Daniel understood immediately. Grant. Grant, the man who slept in his house, wearing his bathrobe, using the Wedgwood ceramic cups he bought for his 10th wedding anniversary, was sitting with the board members, spreading rumors he thought would never be discovered. But he was wrong. Daniel entered the office, Lloyd Bennett, partner group leader. The man who had been his mentor when he started his career now looked at him through his gold-rimmed glasses with concern. "Daniel, I don't want this to be awkward." "Then don't let it be like that," Daniel replied, his voice even. Lloyd sighed, placing the file on the table. "There have been several anonymous complaints sent to the Bar Association about you abusing your position in the Riker case." Daniel just nodded. "You know I didn't do that." "I know, but what about your family?" Daniel sat up straight. "House matters are not company matters." "That may be true, but when your wife's new girlfriend happens to be a golfer with 3 of our committee members—" "Grant Wallace," Daniel said. "I know. I also know that he has staged 3 divorces to gain assets, and now he is doing it for the 4th time." Lloyd raised his eyebrows. "I didn't come here to ask for mercy," Daniel continued. "I just need time, 6 weeks. I don't need the company on my side. I just need you guys to not jump in without seeing the whole game." Lloyd looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. 6 weeks, he said. Nothing more. Daniel left the office like a soldier retreating to prepare for a bigger battle. He scaled back his workload, moved out of the Parker Regent and into a smaller, cheaper, less noticeable hotel. He no longer says much to anyone, no rebuttal in the press. Do not respond to messages from Kendra. Also, don't write anything on social networks. The world thought he was retreating, but actually he is surrounded. Daniel sits in front of the computer, every night scrolling through every email and recording Monica sent, conversations, messages, the times Grant met with figures in the real estate world that he had faced off against in previous lawsuits, shady business deals, and evidence shows that it was Grant who suggested to Kendra to find a way to push Daniel out of the house early so that the divorce would be more favorable. There is a part that Daniel listens to over and over again. Kendra's voice, once his wife, once the mother of 2 children he loved, was whispering, "If he loses his position at the law firm, I will have a legitimate reason to take custody of the children. They need to be stable." Grant's voice, and the house, the car, the retirement account. Let me take care of it. Daniel did not shed tears, no more. He just nodded coldly. The hyphen for the plan he needs to do is visible. At the end of February, Monica sent a text message. Grant has a dinner date this Thursday with a member of his company's board and a Jersey tycoon. Daniel only texted back 3 words, "Put the engine on." And the game begins. Agame of patience, wisdom, and insight. When people thought Daniel had given up, he took steps towards victory. As March passed, Dominic looked like a man giving up everything. He moved to a smaller hotel room, no longer a luxury suite with a city view. He took on fewer cases at the company, spent more time sitting alone in a cafe near the hotel, taking notes in thick notebooks, sometimes just to hear his breathing amid the hustle and bustle of the street. To outsiders, it seemed like he was falling apart, but actually, he was staging a long game of chess. Dominic and Monique quietly draws up a web of shady relationships between Preston and influential business people. He carefully saved every piece of evidence, text messages, photos, emails, any trace that anonymous complaints sent to law offices or professional associations had Preston's hand behind them. Even parties attended by Preston and Riker Technologies board members were quietly monitored by Dominic through the security camera system around the house, something he had invested in for a long time as a professional habit. All are being collected into a secret file. Each page and clip is a precise knife waiting for the right moment to strike. Meanwhile, Dominic was blatantly replaced in the house that was once his home. Preston officially moved in. Neighborhood cameras recorded images of him eating dinner with friends in the set of dishes that Dominic gave Valerie on their 10th wedding anniversary. He was wearing his nightgown, the kind of cashmere that only Dominic would like. Even the cotton slippers Preston wore were the kind that Dominic had custom-made. Valerie began using the surname Holt at social events despite the incomplete divorce proceedings. It seemed they believed everything belonged to them. Dominic did not stop. I let them think that. Because as he told Sophia in a closed meeting, let them believe they are winning. That is the easiest place to take down. May 15th is set as the divorce court date. Valerie and her attorney became increasingly aggressive in the final weeks before trial. They submitted a new proposal, asking for almost all of their current assets and a portion of their future income if Dominic became an official partner of the law firm. She wants the house, wants custody of the children, wants to split the reward from the billion-dollar lawsuit she just won. Dominic didn't react beyond a short, always polite reply. I'll consider it. But when night fell, the hotel desk lamp was still on. Each line of documents was still carefully drafted by him like a lawyer preparing for the biggest trial of his life. 3 days before court, a text message appeared on the phone screen from Abigail. For the first time in many months, his daughter texted him. Mom said after the divorce, Dad will have nothing left. Will Dad become homeless? Dominic read the words over and over again. No irony, not an arrangement, just a passing worry from a child who had been forced to choose sides. He texted back simply but decisively. Don't worry about Dad. The truth always has a way of surfacing on its own. Then he put the phone down and sighed. Now, there is no more room for emotions. Only action remains. The next morning, Dominic made one last call. Not long, not dramatic. One simple sentence, but full of weight. Tomorrow, on time. When the first light of the trial shone on his face through the court window, Dominic was already sitting on the bench outside the courtroom, adjusting the buttons of his vest, the same one he wore when he won the Riker case. The calm and cold look in his eyes makes strangers turn their heads. He didn't bring anyone with him. Don't need anyone. Valerie walked in with Preston and her lawyer, Trent Russo, still looking confident as always. Valerie didn't even glance at Dominic, but Preston stopped, held out his hand, and smiled provocatively. Nothing personal, Dominic. Just family and business. Dominic briefly looked at the other hand, then nodded slightly without shaking it. It is business, he replied, his voice not changing rhythm. Inside the courtroom, a surprise awaited. The audience seats were full. Lloyd Bennett, the law firm's managing partner, sat in the front row, flanked by 3 other executive committee members. Behind them, Victor Riker, CEO of Riker Technologies, was also present. There were many more familiar faces, old customers, old colleagues, people Dominic didn't call, but they came anyway. Valerie turned to Russo and whispered something. Even Preston was starting to lose his temper. Judge Marlene Diaz entered. When she opened the case file, she looked up, looked around the room, and then spoke. Before we began, I was informed that the defense had requested new evidence within the past 48 hours. Is that correct? Sophia Rivera, the lawyer representing Dominic, stood up. Yes, Your Honor, and this evidence directly impacts the nature of the case. Russo immediately objected. This is a ploy to buy time. Another voice rang out from the audience seats. If allowed, I would like to speak up. Lloyd Bennett stood up. I am Lloyd Bennett, representing the law firm where Mr. Mercer works. We would like to participate in the request and present evidence that our client is the victim of an organized campaign to defame and damage his reputation. The judge narrowed his eyes. All lawyers, come closer to the courtroom table. The private exchange was filled with tension. In closing, Judge Diaz stated emphatically, "We will hear the evidence." Plaintiff's counsel's objections are noted but overruled. The presentation begins. Every detail is exposed. Each slice of the lie is pieced together. Monique Lawson, private investigator, presents how Valerie actively guided her children to turn their backs on their father. She showed messages, recordings, and even pictures of Preston entering Dominic's house more than 100 times while Dominic was on a business trip. Then it was Lloyd's turn. He provided documents proving that all anonymous complaints sent came from partners in Preston's real estate deals. Ending with the firm voice of Victor Riker. Mr. Preston Holt approached me to exchange information about Dominic for priority investment in our office chain, he said. I recorded it. Please play the tape. The room was silent as Preston's voice rang out on the record. We're going to wear Dominic out. Valerie's doing her job. When he collapses, we split the rest in half. Valerie's face turned white. Preston looked around as if looking for a way out. When Judge Diaz announced a recess, snow began to fall lightly outside the court window. The atmosphere in the courtroom is entirely different now. The searching looks from before had turned into sympathetic, even respectful looks for Dominic. Preston disappeared right after the break, and Valerie, who once walked in with a confident look, now sat alone next to her lawyer, who was urgently crossing out each item in the disputed documents. As the trial continued, Judge Diaz spoke, her voice no longer filled with the usual severity, but with evident disappointment. In light of the clear evidence presented today, I find the plaintiff's initial requests inappropriate. I will also transfer the file to the prosecutor's office to consider prosecuting acts of falsifying evidence, intentionally damaging the reputation of others, and showing signs of extortion. The sentence fell like a cold verdict on Valerie's head. She sat motionless. There was no blood left on his face. Attorney Russo quickly asked for permission to confer privately with his client. A few minutes later, he stood up and bowed his head before the jury. Your Honor, after consideration, my client agrees to accept the terms of the signed prenuptial agreement. She will not make a request to divide future income, will withdraw all allegations related to Mr. Mercer's professional ethics, and commits to leave the joint property within 30 days. The courtroom was silent. Dominic nodded slightly, not pleased at all. Just a calm look, like the kind of person who has known the end for a long time and is just waiting for everything to go right. Dominic walked out first when everyone left the courtroom without looking back. Outside court, Lloyd, standing next to Dominic the whole way, approached and patted him on the shoulder. The appointment vote will take place next week, he said, but I think after today everyone will know the results. Congratulations, partner Mercer. Dominic just smiled. Thank you for coming. Thanks, Victor, Lloyd replied. It was he who asked all of us to be present today. He said you once saved his company. And this is when he responded. Dominic turned away, but before stepping forward, he saw Liam and Abigail standing silently at the foot of the stairs. The two children he thought he had lost forever. Abigail's eyes were red. "Dad," she called, her voice shaking. "The things in court, did you do that?" Dominic looked at the two. "Don't rush to answer, neither appeasement nor accusation. Mom, Dad, Preston, you all have your choices," he replied slowly. "All three are at fault. Dad chose to work when he should have chosen to stay home. Mom chose differently. Preston, never mind." Liam swallowed. "They speak ill of you. They make us hate you." "Hating is easy, son," Dominic said, looking straight into his eyes. "Understanding is difficult." Abigail squeezed his sleeve. "What should I do now?" Dominic exhaled and bent down slightly. "Let's start again, from the beginning. But this time, with the truth." That evening, Dominic returned to the West Shore Hotel one last time. The room was strangely silent, as if knowing the moment of parting had come. He put the suitcase on the bed, but did not open it. Instead, he sat on the chair and looked at his phone, where unread messages appeared. A string of messages from Preston, filled with panic. The real estate empire he once boasted about is crumbling piece by piece after what happened in court. Partners withdrew capital, and the media began to ask questions. Dominic read through it without responding. Following message from Valerie. Just 4 words. "Preston is gone." And right after that is another line. "I didn't think it would go this far." Dominic did not answer. No more anger. There's nothing left to say. He just remained silent, packed his things, and left the room that had witnessed his darkest days. The next morning, he returned to his house. No longer a shared house, no longer manipulated memories. Just a house, empty. But it's true. In his hand was a small gift box, given back by the hotel staff when he checked out. Inside is a shiny brass nameplate, Dominic Mercer, partner, along with a handwritten note from Lloyd. "Justice suits you." He smiled slightly. Not every victory requires fireworks. Some wins require an open door and a new path to begin. That afternoon, in the familiar kitchen, Dominic stood waiting. No cameras, no tactics, no more pretending to be strong. Then there was a knock on the door. Liam walked in first. Silent. Then he put the phone down on the table. For the first time, there was no technological barrier between them. Abigail followed, holding a box of cookies. "I remember Dad likes this kind." Dominic nodded slightly, his eyes wet. He didn't say anything, just pulled out a chair and invited the two children to sit down. 3 chairs, a simple meal, a new beginning, fragile but real enough to hold on to. And if you're watching this video, I want to say one last thing. Justice does not always come at the right time. The truth does not always win from the beginning. But if you maintain your sanity and your self-respect, then the truth will speak for itself one day. Don't let anyone else define who you are, especially if they don't know you. And if you have ever been betrayed, ever pushed to the edge of your own life, remember, you can still rewrite the story with your own hands. Please share if this story touches you. Click subscribe to accompany real emotional journeys, where each video is a story of everyday life, but breathtakingly profound. Because sometimes, all we need is a story, for us to look back at ourselves. Thanks for listening.